Now on to the good stuff. Well, sort of. Don't take the order too seriously. A few of these may have been put into this video because I needed more time editing them.
No, I did it, Ebenezer. It is my achievement. I wear the chains of my ignorance, the chains I forged in life.
Finally, after all these years, we have finally cleared up the confusion. Christmas Carol, the movie. Well, I guess some of them are specials. This cross-European creation, with the voices of Nick Cage, Kate Winslet, and Michael Gambon, has slightly more addendums than your usual adaptation. For starters, it opens with a live-action intro of Dickens reciting his story, supposedly just to make people think they selected the wrong movie. Scrooge now has this despicable underling that carries out his evictions. And, oh my god, if I have to see one more distracting animal sidekick, I'm going to continue to complain about it. Though there is a fun line where Scrooge goes, "Don't worry about the mice, they were on time." That was cute. But these mice do eat up a lot of screen time and are practically in their own movie, as we constantly see them being separated and reunited, while also trying to draw Scrooge's attention to a letter he received from Belle, which is the biggest addition. We see her from the start working at a hospital whose debt gets transferred over to guess who, and so she writes to him for his help. And in this version, Belle was Fran's best friend, so she and Scrooge have known each other since they were children. Man, with all of these changes, this must be a radically different retelling, right? Nope. These are add-ons, not alterations. They don't really make the movie different as much as they make it longer. The only real changes to the story is now Marley shows up at his office for some reason. And again, we can't show Belle being old, so now Scrooge is much younger than he usually is. And again, the consequence of these elongated inserts apparently seems to be sacrificing screen time from the ghosts of yet to come. Oh, and on this episode of How Do We Make Scrooge Worse, he deprives his beloved pregnant sister any of their father's inheritance because he hates her husband. But then they also have Scrooge being directly involved in Tiny Tim's death by pouring water on him in the middle of winter. Yeah, feed the mice but pour water on the sick child, you monster. Even better, Bob knows about this, and he still drinks to Scrooge's health. Now, if anyone's wondering why make a big deal out of Scrooge being worse, it's not really, but aside from redemption just feeling less earned now. Although Scrooge is primarily a scolding reprimand directed specifically at the wealthy and the greedy, his other main sin isn't cruelty, but apathy. And that side of him, I think, is applicable to conveying the same message to the average person. But turning Scrooge into someone more unpleasant and aggressive, it changes the message from the importance of actively helping people who need it to, you're fine as long as you're not a complete asshole. Not to underplay the value of not being an asshole, so I'm not gonna be a stickler for that if it's not a straight book adaptation. But that aside, the only minor contribution these editions might provide is showing more consequences and victims of Scrooge's callousness, including the cruel people the wealthy can enable in the name of good business. But most of it just feels like pointless padding and just serves to make the message feel incredibly heavy-handed. And despite her added screen time, Belle doesn't get any more development, we don't learn anything more about their relationship, and while some might appreciate a version where Scrooge and Belle are able to reconcile, despite that half of this movie's purpose has been building this up, man, it is such a boring conversation that it's not satisfying. That's another thing. When it's not book-accurate dialogue, the script is just boring. And then on top of that, it's not a particularly good-looking film. Yes, the animation might move better than others, and admittedly the backgrounds are nice, but the character design is very plain and unremarkable, and the overall look is so drab and gray. Well, it is London, I'll give it that. Okay, this is random, but at the end they play what I think is supposed to be Belle's song, and it just reminded me way too much of the song from the animated Titanic movie. Yeesh, was there anything I liked in this? Well, I did like the animation on Marley, and by far the movie's standout is the scene where the ghost of Christmas Present flies over the city, where we see where all of the color and the artistic talent went. And it is genuinely beautiful. It also showcases a book detail that doesn't always get adapted, where Present uses his torch to essentially flavor the people's food, which also causes them to cease their quarrels. There are some good things in it, and it did try something different, but the whole is just a not very interesting watch. And in the ranking, honestly, I would put it under the Saban version, maybe even Barbie. And I'm sorry, but when exactly did this come out? Literally every single source says something different. Mr. Magoo is credited for being the first television animated Christmas special, not just Christmas Carol. If you're not familiar with the character, Mr. Magoo had his own series of comedic shorts surrounded by the gimmick of he couldn't see very well, mistaking objects and animals for people, that sort of thing. Maybe an odd choice for Scrooge, but aside from an extended intro with Magoo doing his usual shtick and establishing that he's participating in a play, this special is a very thorough and book-scripted retelling. And there's a lot of great energy, but also sincerity in Magoo's performance, especially for a character known for being perpetually gleeful.
Belle! Belle, don't leave! Belle! Belle, don't leave.
Though present and past are flipped for some reason I don't know. However, Magoo does have some of the similar afflictions to the stingiest man in town. It is another musical with limited animation, so the songs feel like they're freezing up the story in place and going on about twice as long as they should, and not helped by the characters being largely static. The benefits, however, the songs are a bit catchier, written by the guy who wrote Let It Snow, and there's 5 songs, not 12, so the pacing isn't nearly as bad. I liked the beginning duet between Scrooge and Cratchit, but Despicable? That's one that feels like it drags forever. And even though the character designs are simpler, I feel like they have a much larger range of expression, making the special able to carry the emotion much better. And even if they're stiff, their character designs are way more appealing. Tiny Tim is actually cute in this. But it also has its share of unintentional humor. Dated to a point, but this is pretty good, especially for a first outing.
The first will come at 1, the second at 2, the third will come whenever.
This isn't a retelling, but it's just kind of neat. In an episode of the real Ghostbusters, the Ghostbusters are sent back in time via snowstorm and accidentally suck up the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. This prompts Scrooge to write a book about how he defeated the spirits, which results in the holiday being erased. I guess the man who invented Christmas was only a mild exaggeration. I mean, it's technically true. Anyway, while Egon tries to free the ghost, the others have to go back and play the parts of the ghosts. Well, that just sounds delightful. Is that a freaking viewfinder? Oh my god.
Here, what do you see now?
Why, it's the school I attended.
Again, not an adaptation, but a neat deviation. Oh, and also we see Marley's loincloth. Thanks for that.
Will be haunted by 3 spirits. That's the Johnson who? I'd rather not.
So, there's 3 camps when it comes to this film. The one that praises it for being the most loyal adaptation for retaining the most book-accurate dialogue, the camp that condemns it for being motion capture, aka me, and the camp that is completely traumatized by some of the most horrifying imagery in a movie with Disney's name on it. And that's saying something. The latter 2 camps tend to converge frequently. Okay, that's a little too simplistic, as many give it credit for all the visual craft that isn't painful to look at. And I admit, maybe the backlash to its use of motion capture is a bit excessive. Oh, the characters still do not look great, but I do admit that a lot of motion capture antagonism was at a time when CGI was gradually becoming the norm, and being genuinely worried if this was the direction we were headed. Thankfully not, because everyone agrees it looks terrible. But I can understand animators at the time attempting it just to see if it would work, and some audiences just being fascinated in a time capsule, different aesthetic kind of way. And sure, there is something mesmerizing and even admirable about the character's construction, while also thinking aside from the general datedness and awkwardness, even just as photorealistic human designs, that they're all really ugly. But most of the other aspects of the animation are actually quite nice. Like the snowy cityscapes are utterly gorgeous, and it did have a number of clever visual concepts, like flying over the city through the floor, the best visual adaptation of the amorphous ghosts of Christmas past, the Ghost of Christmas Future being his shadow, not just a shadow, his shadow, seeing the Ghost of Christmas Present dying so gruesomely, and Scrooge inadvertently seeing Bob Cratchit's mourning face up close and personal. And sure, you did have a number that loved that this version went as dark as it did. So yes, I can certainly rank it high for a lot of technical and adaptation points, but it has never been one of my favorites. Yes, this version likely wins for the largest amount of accurate book dialogue, certainly for an animated adaptation, but compared to most of the live-action ones, only really by a fraction, and mostly just because it includes some lines that most other adaptations usually cut for a reason. And even in that Dickensian delivery, the characters honestly sound more like they're quoting the book than having a natural conversation with each other. And where Fred is usually portrayed as relentlessly good-hearted, Colin Firth just seems angry. The elaborate roller coaster sequences just feel like animation reels, probably only exist to compensate for all of the extreme horror. Apparently, one inexplicable helicoptering Mrs. Fezziwig cancels out one horrifying laughing skeleton. Oh yeah, and this was the year where they were really pushing that 3D. But of course, its biggest detractor is the tonal whiplash between the moments of subtle realism with the excessively cartoonish. And it's not just about the flip between the Dickensian script and the explosions and the slapstick, or even between the horror and the comedy. Sometimes it's just the actors flipping between being solemn and extremely hammy. There's a reason why we don't do this anymore. But as I said, the fact that we don't do this anymore makes this something very unique, and for that, and obviously nostalgia, I can see people's attachment to this.
We're collecting donations for needy families.
Well, that's an interesting spin on trespassing, pandering, and illegal solicitation.
Firstly, I know that there's technically a Looney Tunes short with Yosemite Sam as Scrooge, but that wasn't a Christmas Carol adaptation. That was literally just Bugs Bunny torturing a Scrooge surrogate for 10 minutes. As for this modern interpretation, Scrooge being the owner of a mega mart forcing his employees to work on Christmas Day makes almost too much sense. And just as a Looney Tunes sketch, it's funny, it's energetic, it's a great use of these characters.
When a disgruntled employee squashed me with a forklift. 9 times.
But this is way more Looney Tunes than Christmas Carol. Literally. There's so many examples of Daffy abusing his employees and Bugs abusing him that the ghosts maybe take up a third of the runtime. I'm not gonna get too down on non-book adaptations being worse than Scrooge anymore, especially since Daffy being the worst is kind of his thing. And if he's not despicable, then he wouldn't be deserving of all of the extremely egregious physical violence he suffers in this picture. But when he's been so consistently awful to everyone and so dismissive of the ghosts, even when we get to his grave, you don't believe for a second that he feels bad about what he's done. And then at the very last minute, the Tiny Tim stand-in, Porky's niece, says such a heartfelt speech to his grave with these little Christmas cookies that makes it just buyable enough that he would be touched by it. But just barely, and others have disagreed. They think that Daffy is too awful in this. And then he goes so over the top compensating his employees that he almost has a relapse. It's just fun. I like this a lot.
Supporting players?
Hey, we're in this play too, Flintstone.
Yeah, but there can only be one Scrooge.
Well, I guess they got the right guy.
So for as little as I've seen of the Jetsons, I've seen less of the Flintstones, but am equally unenthusiastic about it for pretty much the same reason. Fred Flintstone himself is playing Scrooge in a community play, but at the same time needs to learn his own lesson in humility because, let me guess, he's being a greedy, self-involved prick inconveniencing everyone around him. Oh gee, how did I guess that? So the story is around putting on the play, but we also see the play itself being performed in real time, and watching how the play and life start to blend. Where during the play, Fred starts seeing flashes of his own greed and failings.
It isn't much fun being ignored by your father and left all alone at school, is it?
Pebbles.
There's a BoJack Season 5 joke here somewhere, and I'm surprised that the Flintstones of all things would have such a fairly book-accurate script. And Fred himself is actually a pretty good Scrooge. There are scenes near the end where he sounds absolutely desperate. But the other unique development is that over the course of the play, actors keep getting sick and dropping out, and their parts need to be picked up by Wilma, who plays the Ghost of Christmas Past, as well as Belle, and one of the charity workers at the end. And how this is interpreted by Fred is that Belle is one of the charity workers, making this another version where Scrooge and Belle reconcile.
I've changed. Really, Wilma?
Only with the proper context that it makes sense, and the characters have enough personality that I care, even if it is Fred. I am definitely not a Flintstones fan at all, but I was genuinely impressed by how well this all worked together, both at being able to tell the story lorally while also telling its own around it. Ebenezer, you know what you were doing.
They are man's, and they cling to me. This boy is ignorance. This girl is want. Beware them both, but most of all, beware this boy.
You'd know Richard Williams as the animator of Who Framed Roger Rabbit and the author of that book that every single animator is supposed to read. Sometime while he was trying to create, quote, the greatest animated film of all time, he created this utterly beautiful rendition of such acclaim that it won Best Animated Short at the Academy Awards that year. And it is undeniable that this is the most beautifully animated out of any of the animated Christmas carols. Its style is based on the engravings in the original publication of the book, and especially if you cherish this story as a ghost story, that is the tone it retains throughout this special. It has some of the eeriest sequences of any adaptation. Just this shot of Scrooge walking through his dark house. And for the longest time, this was the most accurate representation of the amorphous ghost of Christmas Past. It really is a testament to why animation is such a great medium for these kinds of fantastical stories. But if that's the case, why is this not championed every year as a Christmas must-watch? More likely because of the way it was made. To a modern audience, the special may come across as unfinished. The special mostly has no background score outside of a couple of sound effects, which definitely helps the eerie atmosphere, but when paired with these unusual transitions of camera pans and rapid cuts for the instances of supernatural travel,
pronouncing on the too much life among his hungry brothers in the dust.
What place is this?
My little child.
And because of its book-accurate script, but its tight 25-minute runtime, it comes off more as a highlight reel of the story's most iconic moments than a naturally flowing story. And not that it matters, but is Comfort and Joy the only carol these people know? It's definitely rough, but for much of it, its beauty and its tone are unmatched. And it is definitely worth seeing at least once.
Christmas. Thank heaven it only comes once a year. Too bad it starts in July.
I had never even heard of this apparently decades-old Hallmark character until someone mentioned this special in the comments of the first video. And I am so glad because I love this. A Scrooge surrogate that's gender-flipped and elderly? I literally didn't think it existed. Amazing that I have never seen this, but this is so nostalgic. This is so strip comics late 90s. Voiced by the always great Trez MacNeille, I think, Maxime is a beacon of snark and sass and grumpiness and general not giving a shitness. This is someone who would have gotten along real great with Elder Toff. And through the entire special, she just has snappy comebacks for absolutely everything. Though not greedy, just grumpy and enjoys solitude. And frankly, has the most legit reasons for disliking Christmas. Because of the commercialism and the oversaturation and the hypocrisy. And how as a kid, she tried to give everyone homemade gifts from the heart and got the expected response. But thankfully, the special doesn't suggest that she needs to just ignore all of that and smile for the sake of holiday spirit. Well, other characters might insinuate it.
Whatever happened to your Christmas spirit?
I had it once.
And?
Once was enough.
But just to care a little bit about those who care about her. Granted, the future in this one is perhaps the biggest stretch of the Tiny Tim becomes the new Scrooge motif. Not to wave aside the influence that adults can have on developing children, but he becomes a miserly, Christmas-hating CEO because Maxime didn't go to a party he invited her to. Yeah, that's a little much. But no, I'm not going to give this comedy grief for not killing him. It still ends on an incredibly sweet note, and Maxime learns a little bit about how her actions affect the people around her, but otherwise remains the same. Which is perfectly fine because Maxime is amazing. This entire special was a blast. Well, it's late 90s cheese, don't go expecting Community. Even the ghosts are conceptually fun. Past is an outdated valley girl. What is it with turning the ghosts of Christmas Past into annoying twats? Though it's funny, seeing her flashback made her quit. Present is one of those hippies. What is time? All we have is now, man.
Time is an illusion, Maxine. Tick tock, seconds, minutes, hours. They just go by, they mean nothing.
Tell that to the phone company.
And Future.
Tonight can't get any weirder.
Is literally aliens with a time machine. This is amazing! And as far as I know, this is the only animated special with Maxime. And I have never wanted to be more wrong about something my entire life. Tell me I am wrong about this. This is my favorite modernized Christmas Carol by far. Well, almost.
I'll give them Christmas, but the other 364 days are mine.
I'm the ghost of Christmas past in all the folks that you've harassed. Glad that I am here at last, cause Mr. CEO, it's movie time, relax and see as we climb up your family tree and look at how you used to be many years ago.
Compacted in a tight 12 minutes, unsurprisingly, Animaniacs' quick take of this story just brings me so much joy. Appropriately, the studio boss Mr. Plotz takes the role of Scrooge, opening the episode by firing Ralph, only to then be haunted by each of the Warner siblings, explaining what a massive jerk he is, each with their own infectiously catchy jingle.
You're guilty in the first degree of causing pain and misery. Now it's time for you to see, so hang on, here we go.
Also Slappy being Marley for 30 seconds, but 30 seconds of Slappy is still way funnier than hours of other characters.
Tonight you will be visited by 3 ghosts.
Why?
I don't know, I lost the other page.
But clearly such a comedy couldn't acknowledge such a downer concept as death. Yep, there's Tim as the new Scrooge again. God, we should have had a counter for this. Still, seeing Plotz as the new Ralph was like perfect karma. Regardless, it's short, it's sweet, and it's Animaniacs, so it wins. My criteria is so inconsistent.
In his will, he left me enough money to pay for his tombstone. Ha! And I had him buried at sea.
The role that Scrooge McDuck was literally made to play. And more old people sass. Weird connection between my top 3 choices. Yeah, we're not even gonna pretend that this isn't somewhat of a nostalgia bias here. It's my list, get over it. And certainly not a perfect or even remotely thorough adaptation of the book, but if we're talking about a complete, consistently high-quality animated experience that captures the spirit of the book, Mickey's is still pretty hard to beat. With only a few direct lines from the book, a short runtime of only 25 minutes, the story being portrayed through iconic Disney characters and various Easter eggs, and boy does Mickey have a habit of putting his name on stuff that he's not in very much. It manages to capture the Disney charm, humor, and whimsy while still containing the soul and not shying away from the darker aspects of the story. Even with Goofy portraying Marley, the shot of him following Scrooge up the stairs is something only this adaptation does, is so chilling. It's one of the very few vivid memories I have as a child where I saw his shadow on my own stairs. And Scrooge being pushed into a flaming grave is still terrifying. And yeah, I know the same thing happens in the Carrie version, but that's after an hour and a half of other crazy terrifying shit happening. At that point, it's lost its impact. This is a genuine shock. You didn't expect this in a Mickey Mouse cartoon. And that it's still able to be fun and entertaining without going through complete tonal whiplash is a testament to the many Disney legends that worked on this. The song in the credits is beautiful, and even though it's technically a short special, this frankly is more of a masterpiece than anything else Disney was making in the 80s. And can we get a shout out to all the homages in this special in the amazing Last Christmas DuckTale episode? Not sure why they needed to redesign the spirits, they're all Disney. What, did you match your cameo quota for that season? But it was an interesting take on the spirits. I greatly enjoyed this episode, and those credits. So that is every single animated Christmas Carol adaptation. And yes, I got all of them, don't look it up. There was a bit of a question on whether to add Muppet Christmas Carol to this list. It may not be impeccably designed from scratch frame by frame, but it is animating or giving life to something that isn't alive, which is why I guess the two mediums often overlap. But it is, at this point, pretty well known that Muppet's Christmas Carol is the best Christmas Carol movie, or at least the best Christmas Carol musical. Anyway, this was just my personal ranking, Animaniacs, and even then, I would probably change everything if I did it again. But what are your favorites? Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays!